Hello, I am Miss Brianne Siderio and I will be your teacher for today. And today I will be presenting my mind map from Lecture 2 that I created. And all week I thought to myself, what can I create as my mind map after reading Lecture 2? And using the creativity in my mind, I thought, why don't I create a big head and then I can visually show what was going on in my head during my reading of Lecture 2 and after my reading of Lecture 2 with all the conclusions I came up with. So, in the middle I have my main idea, my main topic that I got out of Lecture 2, and then I have all my subtopics with more mini subtopics connected. So I'm going to explain this all to you now. Okay, so this is my mind map. The main idea that I got from Lecture 2 was reading literacy instruction then and now. I found the lecture to be so interesting, and after I got done it, that's what I got out of it, how reading literacy instruction changed from the 1900s to present day. And the visual representation I decided to present was one of the books, Dick and Jane, because this is what they used to use in the earliest development of reading literacy instruction to teach kids how to read. Up until now, which I got a picture of the logo for the Common Core State Standards Initiatives that we are taught to teach in our schools to this day. So I would like to start off with the red. I used the red to show the 1900s, 1908 to 1940s, and branching off from my main idea, my subtopic is then, which was back then in the 1900s. And the main ideas that I came up with for this were reading literacy instruction was taught in the following ways. Reading literature were separate ideas. They were not intertwined. Reading was a mere task in isolation, whereas literature was something separate and not connected to the process of reading. And then it touched upon silent reading versus oral reading. And Judd and Gray thought that silent reading was better, while Parker said that oral reading provided expression, where the child could express themselves while they were reading orally. Then I got out of it that when kids were taught to read words, they were taught to memorize the appearance of words. There was no such things as phonics, sounding out. So they were showed a word and they were supposed to memorize it, and then they would know the word. Basal programs were introduced then, which were manuals, scripted text, workbooks, worksheets, books that were pre-decodable, included sight words, and predictable text. And writing really wasn't seen then. It was basically handwriting, how to formulate letters. There was no writing, putting your thoughts down on paper, knowing that, spoken language can be put into written language. And then spelling was taught in isolation. Students were taught to memorize words and write them down, and if they got them wrong, then they would review the word and practice it until they reached mastery. So for each quadrant in my mind, I decided just to include one picture. So after reading all of this in my lecture, the one picture I decided to do was a student in his desk falling asleep in his book, because this to me is very boring and it just sounds like it's very drill oriented, and there's no hands-on learning, there's no interaction between students, and it doesn't seem very engaging. So moving from then in the 1900s, then I decided to go and stop at the 1950s, where there is a major change. And that major change is a major change in how to teach reading literacy instruction, which now we get to see more of a phonics-based approach. Drill sounds are introduced, writing the sounds, so kids are starting to write the sounds that they hear in words. They're starting to learn a correlation between letters and sounds, that, letters have sounds and sounds go with letters. And then when they're reading, they're starting to sound out words, not just memorize a word in isolation. And my visual representation here was, which I'm sure many teachers are familiar with, the foundations chart, which teaches letters and sounds. It is a drill. You can do it in many different ways, so you're just not drilling the kids repeatedly every day, but the kids connect the sound with the letter and a picture. So they would say A apple app, B bat ba, C cat ca, D dog da, E at, and so forth. So in the 1950s, we start to see a major change going towards phonics instead of, rote memorization. Oh, right. So then I'm going to move to the next quadrant, and here my main subtopic, branching off from my major topic, is the best approach to reading, which took place in the 1960s to the 1970s. And Jean S. Shaw, wrote a book called Learning to Read, and his main idea in this book was the great debate. What's effective? What is the most effective way to teach literacy instruction to children so we can have literate individuals by the time they leave school, so they could go into the workforce, so they could go out to college, and they could be literate individuals. And branching off of here, we start to see that Dick and Jane books are gone. Dick and Jane books was where the kids just basically read it. They memorized words in isolation, and it was very predictable, the text. It was very repetitious. But in the 1960s, 1970s, those books start to disappear. Even though they're still around, I have one student who he has all the Dick and Jane books at home, and he told me that he knows how to read them all. And he says his mom told me that's how he learned to read. So I mean, it's still a good strategy to teach children how to read. But during this time, they were gone, and we start to see the phonics approach starting to take effect. And then whole language starts to come into play, where that's a thematic approach, where you're touching on all different, subjects, areas. It's going into social studies, science, math, that you can incorporate into your reading programs. Authentic literature is being introduced, high quality literature. It's child-centered, and reading should be treated as a natural process that happens just like oral language. So we start to see phonics versus whole language. Which one is the best way to teach reading literacy instruction? So then that brings us to 2000, to present day. I'm just going to switch over here. And as my subtopic, my main idea here, I have 2000, and I wrote in the middle now. I put the now because this is present day, starting from 2000 to now, 2013. I put the National Reading Panel and the Common Core State Standard Initiative. So the National Reading Panel, their big question was how to teach reading, teaching children to read. They wanted to find out what was the best way to teach children how to read, to become literate individuals. And that panel was made up of 14 people, and they came up with they came up with phonemic awareness, vocabulary, comprehension, writing, reading fluency, phonics instruction, and these are all seen in the Common Core State Standards initiatives that we as teachers today are required to put in all our lesson plans, and we have to make sure that the curriculum and lessons that we are teaching are corresponding to these Common Core standards that should be taught. So we have phonics instruction, which is that correlation between letters and sounds. The kids use this knowledge when they're reading or spelling. Reading fluency, fluent readers comprehend better versus non-fluent readers. We have vocabulary. This can be taught in many different ways. It can be taught visually, through experience. I like to teach it through experience. If I was teaching a child the word reverse, instead of just saying reverse means to go backwards, I would have a child stand up and make them go in reverse, and that would help them learn the word better. And vocabulary should be taught directly and indirectly. And vocabulary is essential, especially when you're reading, because if you don't understand words when you're reading, then you're not going to be able to comprehend the text well. And then we come to comprehension, which is a very complex area. The reader must interact with the text, just not merely read it. They need to be able to read the text and interact with it, ask questions. Why did this happen? Make inferences, draw conclusions, use picture clues. They have to understand the vocabulary in it. Teachers must plan and prep comprehension lessons that are really going to give students strategies to better equip themselves while they're reading. So this is a big one, especially when I'm planning comprehension lessons in my kindergarten classroom. And then writing is no more just handwriting. I do handwriting in my classroom now, and the kids practice their letters, but that's not what I call writing. Writing is where they are learning how to write sentences. They're learning that what they think they can put down on paper. Spoken language can be put down on paper, so children are actually learning that there's a correlation between thoughts and spoken language, and they're learning grammar as well, how to construct a sentence. In kindergarten, the simplicity of it is, you know, uppercase letters, spaces in between, period at the end. That's where we're at right now. But writing is no more just handwriting. And then my visual representation for this was I put the cycle of literacy, which involves listening, reading, writing, and speaking. You use all four of these during literacy, well, use all four of these in order to be a literate person, and during your literacy instruction, all four of these are used. So today, this is what teachers are supposed to teach. This is what's happening in the classroom. I think it's wonderful. I think it's a well-balanced approach, and you can, you know, certainly incorporate whole language into this by teaching all of these things, and you're teaching it in a unit about weather, or you're teaching it in a unit about farms. So you can definitely do whole language and phonics and all of these other components together, and I think it just provides a well-balanced approach to make individuals literate for college and the workforce. So I think the biggest debate now is how's the pedagogy, what is the appropriate ways to teach all of this? What are the appropriate programs to use to teach it? Because I know many teachers have basal programs where everything's scripted, worksheets, phonics workbooks, you know, the predictable text, and some of that could get very boring to a student, and I think it should be more hands-on learning with manipulatives. Technology should be used, but that's another issue for another time. But I couldn't fit this on my mind map, but we were supposed to go on, and we were supposed to view 2 literacy websites. So I checked out the National Council of Teachers of English that was started in 1911, and I kind of scrolled the website, but I looked for like the main idea. Like I read their mission statement, and I looked for the main driving force that they go out in the world to work for. So they promote the development of literacy to make society literate. And the National Reading Conference, which is now known as the Literacy Research Association, which was founded in 2009, that is a community of scholars dedicated to literacy research to drive the development of literacy in a multicultural and multilingual world. So even though they're taking different approaches to literacy, their main goal is to make society literate. And that is my mind map on reading literacy instruction then and now, and I'm so much more happier with the now than the then. Thank you.